Good morning and welcome to Fiscal Matters, a new podcast by the Financial and Fiscal Commission. And today we have a research specialist, Mr. Thando Ngozo here, just to chat about the fiscal position that South Africa is currently in and this looming fiscal crisis that we're in and how we can what the government can do to get us out of this fiscal crisis. So let's jump straight into it, Thando. Despite efforts of fiscal consolidation, the public debt burden remains very high. Economic growth is low. And significantly and important for the fiscal crisis, to understand the fiscal crisis, is that debt service costs are high and are rising. So let's just pause there. Tell us a little bit about how debt service costs impact the budget. Why is this such a big concern?
Right. Thanks for the opportunity, by the way. We're used to writing about these issues, so it's good to be talking to the issues as well. So it's useful to think of the fiscal policy as a redistribution tool. So it can be used effectively to distribute resources from the rich to the poor, as it has been the case if you follow our fiscal trajectory from 1994. That's what has been happening. So it becomes progressive in that way. But then if you have high debt service costs, it disrupts that progressivity of the fiscal policy, in the sense that because the interest that you pay on your debt is basically it goes to the bond holders, the people that are borrowing you the money to fund the deficit. So these are pension funds, banks, and people like that. So you're effectively taking money from taxpayers, you're giving it to bondholders. That's the first thing. But secondly, it erodes the expenditure that's supposed to be going to the poor, like I've already said.
Yes.
If the fiscal policy has to be progressive. So it means then poor fiscal transfers are limited, because you have a significant amount of your resources going to service the debt, going to bondholders instead of
Yes.
so essentially that's the negative impact of high service costs, and we've seen it happening already in our case in South Africa.
Yes, it's crowding out expenditure
Yes.
on key priorities, basic service delivery, growth enhancing infrastructure, health, education, as you said. So, Thando, the fiscal crisis that we're in, or that is looming, where does it come from? What are some of the key elements underpinning this fiscal crisis? Historically, where does it stem from, in your view?
It definitely has to do with the period after the global financial crisis. You will recall that before that, in the run-up to the global financial crisis, South Africa had its golden years, if you will call it that.
Yes.
Because growth was wide, averaging 4.2% at the time. We even managed to post a fiscal surplus of 1.3% during that period. So your fiscal figures or metrics, they point to a story of a good story that was happening over the period, right?
Yeah.
So what then happened, and this was, I think, on the assumption that growth will continue to be high, and maybe you will even achieve higher rates of growth. Government decided then to increase spending. So there was an increase in the number of civil servants, particularly with regards to health, education, and police. And what that meant is because those take about 50% of the budget. So if you increase the numbers there, you effectively increasing the number of civil servants. That's the number one. Number two, what happened was that in order to attract civil people to the civil service, or to become civil servants, work for government, there was what is called occupation-specific dispensation that was introduced, mainly to increase salaries for those critical areas of the civil service, like your health, your education, and so not only did you increase numbers, but you also increased salaries as well. So that in essence represents a permanent kind of increase in expenditure that happened towards the end of that period, around 2000. I think the agreement with civil servants happened around 2007. So so when the global financial crisis came and hit the economy so hard, it then growth plummeted from the average of 4.2 that we're talking about to 1.7. Now, if that happens, then you have a serious problem in the context of an expenditure that is very high and permanently so. Growth plummeting means then you have problem with your revenue, because there's this strong correlation between growth and revenue. So those are the roots of the crisis. Then we've never recovered from the global financial crisis in terms of our growth, but we had a high expenditure trajectory. We're struggling with then our revenue, and then which means then your fiscal deficit then becomes structural, in the sense that you are unable to close that gap between revenue and expenditure without it being underpinned by growth. Obviously, that it affects your debt as government, because you have to finance the fiscal deficit on a permanent basis. So those were the roots of the fiscal crisis in short.
No, I also want to take a bit of a historical lens, as you have now, and look back to not quite the dawn of the democracy, but the early days of our democracy, late 1990s, early 2000s. Also, part of the period where we see this higher growth. But prior to this high growth, the government was struggling with a similar situation in terms of high public debt levels, and it adopted what we know as the GEAR strategy to bring about more macroeconomic stability through reducing the budget deficit and also introducing some tax incentives to boost investment. Now, I want to compare those actions to what the government is doing now. We know we're trying to reduce the budget deficit, but is the government leveraging tax incentives as a means to boost growth? Is it leveraging that policy tool at the moment as well?
It's interesting that you speak about tax incentives, because the literature tells us that when you look at their impact on growth, it's inconclusive, meaning that there's some academics who argue strongly for it, and those that argue against that. In our case, we have introduced a number of incentives, but as you will know, the main goal of an incentive is to correct a particular whatever you think that the market cannot resolve using the tax policy. For instance, then you can have an investment tax incentive that will encourage people to come and invest. It might come in different, like we have in the motor vehicle sector, we have incentives that encourage that sector in particular, and you can have a number of them. But the most important thing is that because you are foregoing some government revenue in order to resolve this, then you're confronted with the question whether the cost is or the benefit is worth the cost.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the problem we've been facing, I think, in South Africa, with most of these tax incentives to really there is no evidence to show us that the cost, the revenue that we forgot, is worth the benefits. Mainly because what you're trying to resolve using tax incentive, you might resolve in another way. For instance, when you talk about investment, you may make the environment conducive to investment. enabling infrastructure, telecommunications, whatever is it that you think is important for investors. And investors, the literature shows us that investors are more concerned about those things than receiving the tax incentives. So in essence, I'm saying tax incentives, they have rationale. There is a rationale to introduce them, and they may work, but in terms of the real impact of that, it is questionable, and the literature is even not in agreement as to if this is the right policy instrument to use.
Okay. And also on the topic of tax incentives and tax in general, there is a limit to personal income tax hikes. As you have mentioned to me prior to this interview, we rely heavily on PIT. And would you agree that tax hikes in that regard do have to reach a limit at some point? Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely, because you can increase personal income tax to a certain level. There is a level that you reach where it becomes a disincentive, especially for high earners, people who can easily migrate to other countries if they think that the tax that they are paying is very high. So in that sense, then there is a limit in which you limit to increasing personal income tax. Yes, I totally agree.
Now you've already touched on this, but you described this fiscal crisis as being structural in nature. It's a chronic problem, not merely an acute problem. And I just thought if you could briefly elaborate a little bit of this. You agree that it's a structural problem?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on why it's structural in nature?
So it's structural. So at the center of it all is economic growth, right? So I'm saying our economic growth has been structurally low since the global financial crisis, and the reason for that is because the economy has been prevented from growing by supply side constraints. So by that we mean things like the electricity, for instance. You've seen the outages that we've experienced in the country. In logistics, you've seen the challenges with transporting goods, especially through our railway network and the ports, but also the road, and of late water as well. You might have been aware that in Johannesburg, for instance, the large population of Johannesburg has been without water for the last 10 days. It speaks to water outages as well, because there is a linkage anyway between power supply and water supply in terms of reticulation and the infrastructure and things like this. And because the water infrastructure has not been maintained as well, then you have a problem even in the, so you have a problem on the supply side of the economy. That's stopping the economy from growing, and it has stopped the economy from growing for a long time now. If you think of when the global financial crisis happened up to now, and even now we're talking about for last year we're talking about a growth of 0.7. So you see that the growth has been structurally low, and so that's the first problem. The second problem then is the one that I've already alluded to, that you have a situation where the expenditure is permanently high, and because of the growth you are struggling to underpin it with adequate revenue that will make sure that there is a balance in the equation. So that difference then between revenue and expenditure has been there for a while, and it's not closing. Ideally it should close, but it's not closing, because that tells you then the structural nature of the fiscal crisis that we're facing.
So as we come to the last question here, it really is the crux of the matter is, how do we get out of this structural problem? How do we move forward? How do we restore fiscal credibility in South Africa and macroeconomic stability in South Africa? And essentially, how do we put South Africa on a higher growth path? Could you tell us a little bit about this? What would you say is needed to restore fiscal credibility in South Africa? And then also, you mentioned these supply side constraints, which naturally makes one think of the state-owned enterprises. So what sort of role do SOEs play then in restoring fiscal credibility in South Africa and really putting South Africa on a higher growth trajectory?
So right. So there are two problems that you're dealing with. You have to resolve the constraints that are stopping the economy from growing, and then you have to stimulate the economy. But even before we get there, we have to acknowledge as a country that we have a growth problem, right? That is at the center of everything else. So in dealing with growth, and the beginning is to resolve the constraints. So how do you resolve the constraint? Then what you said about SOEs then becomes important, because, for instance, in the energy sector, you have Eskom that's operating in that sector as a major SOE. And then with logistics and transport, you have Transnet that's operating there, and then with water and the other aspects, you have municipalities that are operating. So you then have to look at these institutions and their functionality and their ability to really fulfill their mandate. When it comes to SOEs, we've done as a commission a lot of work that tells us that financially they are not stable, they are not healthy, operationally as well. So then which means then you have to look at a way of boosting their balance sheet. How do you improve their balance sheet so that they are in a position to function well? How do you help them operationally so that they function well? So SOEs play a critical role, and their functionality and their health in terms of their finances and in terms of their operation becomes critical in that regard. Even municipalities as well. You know the challenges that we have with our municipalities. How do you enable them to operate well financially and operationally? So that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is then how then do you stimulate growth? And we're thinking as the Commission, the greening of the economy is going to be with us. That's where we're heading to, if you look at our future, because we want a clean environment, and that speaks to the green economy. So how can we take advantage of that as a country and boost our growth? And we've said even in our annual submission to the budget this year that we think greening the economy will entail some enabling goods that will make sure that we green the economy in the most effective way, so that looking at things like batteries to store, for instance, energy that you generate from renewables, for instance. That's the kind of thing that we should be thinking as a country that will enable us to. So our manufacturing sector, our industrial policy should be aligned to the economy in that sense, and even technologies that will enable us to green the economy. Again, the SO is coming into the picture. Sasol, for instance, can be critical when it comes to that. How do we support Sasol to take that role and position South Africa as a country that is able to, first of all, research technologies in this regard that are relevant, and then export them to the rest of the world.
No, thank you, Tando. I think you've provided some really useful insights, not only into the nature of this crisis that we're facing, and not only the roots of the crisis. It's important to understand where it came from, so that we can look at ways to restore fiscal credibility. And with fiscal credibility, you've made a good argument to, the first hurdle is actually, before we can even think of new growth methods, is to address the bottlenecks in the supply side channels, you know, and as you said, that entails some restructuring of our SOEs, improvement of our financial metrics, operational performance, governance structures at SOEs, and then we can look to the future, you know, in terms of finding new growth paths. So thank you for your contributions today on Fiscal Matters.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.